toward, and what's the action plan that you're going to, the steps you're going to take to get there. And during this session, we're going to experiment with these, with a couple different techniques and processes. Our condensed process, if you don't have a mission, vision, and values, we recommend that you create them, that you work together to come up with that. But if you do, to check whether they're still on target. To think about who your stakeholders or your audience is. And we'll talk about that a little bit. To assess, where is your organization? How are we doing? Are we set up for the future? Do we have processes in place to make sure everybody understands how we operate? The fourth bullet, SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. Sometimes it's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, challenges, or some other assessment tool is really looking at your internal environment and your external environment. And then setting up those key pillars, the strategic directions and the initiatives that you'll pursue underneath the strategic directions. And finally, you get to action plan. What are the steps? Who does it? What resources do you need? How do you make sure you get where you're going? So that's what we'll talk about in the next couple of minutes, or 80 minutes, hours and hours. We wish we had 5 hours. Let me hand this over to Wade to introduce our organization.
All right, so this organization may look kind of familiar to you, and we're going to use it as an example today when we go into some breakout activities. So let me introduce you to Slime Lake Association. Sounds pretty attractive, doesn't it? So we're kind of presenting a situation, more or less, of what Slime Lake is or what the association is about. They do a lot of the same things a lot of lake groups do. They maintain fisheries, invasive fish species are an issue. They've maybe done some shoreline restoration with some native grasses. But despite those efforts, the lake is continually degraded. Eurasian water milfoil, we're mentioning, curly leaf pondweed, so some invasive plant species are making their way in. You may have some sporadic efforts over the last 15-ish years. Maybe you applied for a grant here and there, but the efforts have been kind of few and far between. The founders of your organization, this 15-year-old organization, are still the same folks that are there. They might be getting a little burned out. If you can read that third paragraph, they're still in leadership roles, but they're maybe more interested in the socialization of it. They're not maybe quite as effective as they used to be. You have some events, but also you're struggling to find new people too. So there's not a lot of new faces in the organization, a lot of kind of the same folks. So you're struggling to kind of evolve and get your, can I have the clicker, Sharon? Forgot about that. So that's kind of our situation. So we're gonna have some activities that we're gonna base around this the Slime Lake Association. Does any of this sound familiar to any group in the room? Amazing. All right, so we're going to start with the mission, vision, and values. So everyone's heard of this, but we're going to go over it and just kind of talk about the importance of it. So the mission, more or less, why do we exist? What's the reason this association exists? And we're going to present some examples on the next slide. Vision is more of a what are we aspiring to be? That's our future goals statement. So when you have that elevator pitch, you find someone that wants to know about your organization, you got 20 seconds, you're probably going to tell them the mission. You're going to say, this is what we do, and you're probably going to sneak in the vision too. We really want to go here. Values, those are like your bullet points, the pillars that you stand on. What are the things that we really value the most? What do we hang our hat on? So for Slime Lake, in our case, we're going to maintain the quality of the lake, species diversity, optimal water quality, and human enjoyment. Our vision for the future that we may not be totally doing today is getting a thriving lake ecosystem. We're not quite there, but that's what we're going towards. And the values, that's kind of our pillars. So we want participation, we want sustainability, human health and well-being, accountability, and leadership for the organization. So that's kind of the very quick rundown. And this is going to lead into our first activity. So anyone that's in the back that's not in the little group, I'd encourage you to come and find a group because we're going to kind of talk through some things for just a few minutes. Sharon, I think you're handling this one.
Okay, so you already saw Slime Lakes, the Slime Lake Association mission, vision, values. Now we're going, you're the board, a big board. Thank you all for coming to this strategic planning session. And we're going to discuss who is the audience, who are our stakeholders for the association. You can think about your own organization, or you could think about this mythical organization. And I'm going to give you a few minutes to fill in the side of the slide that looks like this. This is just a bubble of thinking about who do you serve internally and who do you serve outside of the organization. So I'll give you an example just to get you thinking. You might serve homeowners who have property along the edge of a lake, and they are internal stakeholders. But you also might be a lake that attracts a lot of seasonal visitors for fishing, and the businesses in your community are very concerned about the health and well-being of the lake. Those local businesses are also stakeholders, and depending on how involved they are with your organization, they might be internal or external. So I'm going to give you about 2 minutes to just brainstorm, either for your own association or for Slime Lake Association, who those stakeholders might be. And I want to invite you, once you've got a few stakeholders listed, sorry, I'll stop moving. Once you've got a few stakeholders listed, to talk amongst yourself in your small group to see if there's any creative ideas that have come out. Oh, okay. Yeah, find a group. Okay. Okay, I'm going to have everybody come back together. I love hearing this generative thinking, but I'm going to pull you all back together. Nobody's. Yeah. Thank you. So let's hear from your tables. Who did you just shout out some, or you could raise your hand and I'll call on you. Shout out some that you've identified.
Veterans Camp, the DNR, the township and the county because they don't want to help us. That's
All right. Well, that's an interesting aspect here, is that sometimes you have stakeholders who are not actually supporting you. And then you have the issue of how do you turn those stakeholders into supporters? Thank you for bringing that up. Others?
We had similar ones. We had the DNR. We have a local nonprofit that owns land. And we have, our lake is between two townships. Theirs is 3. We have DNR critical areas for external stakeholders. You had the YMCA, I think, too. A camp, YMCA camp. And then our internal stakeholders, we had a lot of trouble deciding who was internal versus external. But we decided that we had riparian association members there, a district. You had, what do you call them, parcels, people who own parcels. We have lake association members who are not riparian. We have riparian owners who are not part of the lake association. And our board, and then most recently our riparian wake boat owners.
Right. So you have the question of who's internal and who's external. It's a fine point because people move between. Oftentimes, one thing I've heard is thinking of funders as external stakeholders or regulatory agencies. They're not totally vested in your organization, but yet they have a little bit of control, sometimes a lot of control, and they're engaged in some ways.
Just to take up on your point about wake boats, yeah, there are owners who have wake boats and owners who don't, but externally, I don't know what the name of the organization is, but boat manufacturers spend a lot of money lobbying in Madison, and so they claim a stake in behalf of their business and pretty well any lake over 50 acres in Wisconsin.
I'll just add after our keynote speech, the lake.
Exactly. Thank you for saying that. The lake and all of the species within it. The exercise is useful in that oftentimes, either when doing a planning process, you want to bring in the voices of various stakeholders, and you could do that by inviting them to the process or by doing some preliminary work, interviews, focus groups, surveys to find out how they feel about the organization. But also thinking about the lake is really important because your organization is there to preserve the integrity and the ecological health of the lake itself. It's not just for human enjoyment. So I appreciate you bringing that up. I want to bring up the flip side of your paper is a power grid. And this is just another exercise that you might want to do with a board or with your association, with your strategic planning team, that sometimes people or organizations have a lot of interest and little power. Sometimes people have a lot of influence. A lot of influence, even with only a little bit of interest. So I don't know if anyone does anyone have an idea of who might have A lot of interest, but little power. The owners, property owners, others. Lodges, okay. You know your audiences, but it's important to think about that because you want to make sure that everybody's interests are taken into account. In terms of influence, you might have state laws or regulations that really dictate how you can operate. They might have a lot of influence and less interest in the particular place. So understanding your stakeholders is a critical first step. And I mentioned that you could do a couple exploratory tools to find out about those stakeholders. I personally love focus groups. I almost always will recommend focus groups because you get a generative conversation, but even just exploratory interviews can be super helpful to hear the opinion of somebody who might not be involved directly in your organization. There's also a tool called organizational assessment. We're not gonna do an exercise on this, but we'll put this in the packet where you can have all the members of your board or even all the members do an assessment of your organization to find out what are the internal strengths, what are some of the challenges, what are different perceptions of the organization. And this is very helpful because you as the president or the vice president or executive committee member might have a very, very clear picture of your organization and the history of your organization, but others might not. And so doing an assessment prior to engaging in strategic planning can give you a broad sense of how people perceive your organization. We're moving very, very rapidly through tools, so forgive us for this really quick exploratory course.
Some with the structure, but then it's sort of some people aren't as maybe they haven't worked in private industry to have that structure. I mean, we're having some discussions recently about job descriptions. What are the different roles? What are the things we're capturing? Do we even have job descriptions? What's the format we use? What are do we want to get that complicated or not? Then performance reviews after the year. Did you do what you were intended to do? You know, how do you have that conversation with a person if they aren't doing something? And rather than a surprise at the end of the year, or looking to make a change, it shouldn't be something that, you know, hadn't been discussed. So how do you put some of that structure, like in a private company, you would have some of those, you know, some of those abilities to have that type of discussion and structure, but not get it so complicated to the point where people feel handcuffed. And now it's like, well, this isn't fun anymore. This is how do we better ourselves for the community as opposed to, it's not a P&L. We're trying to make, you know, money.
Great. Do I need to repeat that? It's maybe. Okay. I forgot. Yeah. So the question was really about structure, organizational structure. How much structure is good for an organization? Do you have job descriptions? Do you evaluate your members? And I'm going to say a really wishy-washy answer. It depends, right? You know your organization. You know the culture of your organization. One of the other things I'm working on right now is putting together a training for nonprofit boards. And we do, myself and my colleague putting this together, we do recommend job descriptions. We recommend clarity of who does what, where does responsibility fall, committee structure so that different types of work gets done. Much of that is for accountability to make sure that you can move forward. But there's another part of it is to give everybody a place. everybody who volunteers for an organization does so because they care about that organization. They care about the mission of the organization. They care about the actual lake or river. They care about the people who are involved. And so they're looking for a way for their volunteer work to really have impact. And it's really hard to walk into an organization that doesn't have entry ramps. So entry ramps could be officer positions, they could be committees, they could be volunteer activities. So having those entry ramps, being very, very clear about how the organization operates, makes it easier for your volunteers to get involved. But that said, it depends on the culture of your organization. If you are with an organization that's really loose and wants to get together on Friday nights to drink beer and talk about ecology, you probably aren't going to go that far into structure. And so the strategic planning process is a way for you and your officers, your volunteers to have the conversation of how much structure is important for us. A lake district, I think it's dictated, isn't it? How you operate? Yeah, so it's going to be a bit different for a lake district. Some pieces are legislated, many aren't. So you would use your opportunities at planning to figure out how much structure is good for us. How do we put our processes down on paper so that anybody entering the organization understands these processes?
All right, I'm going to get into the next part here. I wanted to mention to your question, though, I think if you were in the session earlier today, Sarah mentioned as an incoming board member, it's really hard to not have some direction and just kind of walk in and just like, well, here I am. How do I contribute? So if nothing else, if you have some incoming board members that are new to the organization, I would really recommend having your leadership team or some kind of mentor on the board talk about what are the interests, what do you feel like you could excel in, or what do you want to do, and then give them some direction to start off with. Otherwise, you're going to get a year down the road, and that person's just going to be attending meetings, and it's not going to be as useful. So, highly recommend it. All right, we're going to get into SWOT or SWOC, depending on what you prefer. Sometimes threats is a little adversarial, so we go with challenges instead. We're going to get into our next activity. We'll go over this really quickly. This is for either Slime Lake Association or your own river or lake association or district. So really quickly, strengths are exactly what you think they are. They're kind of the assets for your group. Weaknesses, those are kind of the gaps. So that's what you're wishing you could fill in the future after the strategic planning process. Opportunities are kind of that future aspirational thought, like, man, in 5 years, I hope we get here. Or I hope this turns into this. Maybe there's an ongoing effort that you wish could go to the next level. That's kind of the opportunity. Challenges are barriers to goals. And sometimes we think about, like, you're going to fill in weaknesses, and then you're going to get to challenges and like, well, what the heck's the difference between these two? Challenges are, we don't want to repeat weaknesses and challenges. So the challenges are more so the reasons why the weaknesses exist. So what's causing the weaknesses to happen? And the challenges are kind of like, what's the roadmap to, or what are the things that are in our way? What are the barriers? So we're going to take a couple minutes to work individually. So you can kind of think about your own organization or Slime Lake. We'll say 2 minutes, and then we're going to work as a group for about 5 minutes. So go ahead and take a couple minutes for yourself. All right, let's wrap up your final individual thoughts and then let's break out into our teams again, compare what we have, get some new ideas generated. We'll take about 5 minutes for this. All right, let's just take about 1 more minute. Then we're going to break up your conversations. All right. How we come back together, kind of share out a little bit. Sorry to break things up. You guys are having some good conversations, it looks like, at least. Or you're just talking about what you're going to do later today. I don't know. What are you going to eat? Yeah, I think we're all eating the same thing or similar things. All right. All right. The good stuff is great. You know, strengths, opportunities. Let's focus on the bad stuff. How about that? We only have a couple of minutes to kind of share that out. So this kind of leads to other components of strategic planning as we kind of go forward in the process. So let's talk about maybe some of the weaknesses or challenges that you guys came up with. And I'm just going to rapid fire them at me. I'm going to repeat them for the virtual audience too.
right direction, which is to the township. Now we have a fight between the township saying it's for the county and the county says it is the township's responsibility. Yet Lakers still want to pay for it. And so.
Okay, so gravel, we got gravel.
Chapter 33 to do the road, to do the lake. So that's our district issue.
Okay. Did you come up with an opportunity or a challenge to kind of,
Yes.
yeah, or something that you can do to control that, or what maybe a path forward would be? Get new homeowners. All right, that's gonna be tough. All right, why don't we go do another one? Go ahead. Something real quick.
When it comes to struggles that organizations have is the transfer of knowledge from elected officials or board members or even lake members or riparian owners from group to group, generation to generation. So it's a challenge that a lot of groups don't know that they've had management plans done in the past, or they don't know who their lake biologist is. And so having kind of like a, I don't know, Lake Association 101 book, pamphlet, whatever, that goes from leader to leader as that leadership role passes hands, we've seen is helpful, but most groups do not have that, which makes actual management and progress every time there's a new elected person challenging.
Yeah. Are you from Golden Sands?
I am not. I'm from the Southeastern Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission.
Southeastern. Okay.
So quasi-governmental.
I do. Side note, I do have a Golden Sands pen up here in case anyone left that with clipboards. So thank you for that comment. Anyone else? Some challenges or a weakness that you came up with? Good. Let's go real quick though, if we could. Oh.
Activities around the organization, we're actually losing membership. And we have only about 10% of the people around the lake who are year-round residents. So we have a huge amount. And opportunities, well, challenges, we got climate change, we got rip-rapped shorelines. Opportunities, we need to form a lake stewardship committee or group and bring in the real stakeholders from the outside, because we're shriveling up with just us.
Yeah, that's a good one. Climate change stood out to me because that's something that we don't always think about, like in terms of a challenge, but like, what about COVID, right? I mean, felt like a pretty good challenge.
Well, our lake organization is pretty strong socially. We have lots of social events over the course of the summer and the fall. But I was sharing that I just discovered a couple of months ago that although I'm the president of the association, I'm not a member of the association. Well, I am. I know I paid my dues, but there's kind of a lack of, I'll just say, for want of a better word, sort of professional running of the association. Someone collects money here, someone collects money there, the checks get cashed, it gets put in the bank account, but no one's actually recording in a central location who gave what for what purpose. And so that means I can't turn that around and then send out reminders to people or asks to people. So I think that, I don't know if you find that in your association, just that lack of, as I say, professional running.
Yeah, accountability might be it. Anyone else? Yeah, got one.
Yeah, we're on a lake association, 155 acres. Our budget is 20 to 25,000 a year for chemical treatment and harvesting. It's all volunteer payment. We're not a lake district. So there's always 7 to 10 people that don't put in any money and they enjoy the benefits, and there's nothing we can do about it. And that's our problem, getting everyone to pay financially.
All right. So we're gonna move along. We have our next, Sharon, you're gonna organize our next breakout around strategic direction.
Okay. That was really interesting to me to hear those comments. I don't usually work with this type of group. And first, when you talked about the gravel roads and sodium chloride treatment, I was like, oh my goodness, what is this all about? But then I started hearing things that are more familiar. Things about participation, about leadership succession, about how do you get new people to be on the board and how do you communicate to them the history and the processes? And then we have this freeloader problem of how do you get everybody to pay if they're benefiting from the organization? And the professionalism and the accountability harks back to the question we had earlier about how many processes do you put in place, how much structure. And structure is one way to increase that professionalism. So those are very familiar problems and issues that organizations have. So when the fictional board of Slime Lake Association got together, and the board is Wade and I, we're supposed to have 2 more people, but they are freeloading on our expertise. So we oops, it went back. There we go. What are the barriers for Slime Lake Association? And we came up with some key barriers. The board does not have the skills or the training to fully carry out the mission of the organization. We heard something like that. We have a lack of community engagement overall, translating to a shortage of volunteers to do restoration and cleanup projects. Are these sounding familiar? Yeah, okay. The organization does not have a consistent, reliable source of funding. That's always the key thing that I hear with the organizations I work with, small community organizations. And ecological pressure on the lake has been exacerbated by climate change and the introduction of invasive species. One thing I want you to note about these 4 that we came up with, 3 of them are organizational issues. They're internal issues to how do we run our organization. The 4th is the mission issue. Here's what we do, and increased challenges to what we do. So we've identified these are our barriers. Now we get to the heart and soul of strategic planning, is how are we as an organization, as a group of really involved and committed citizens going to address that? And so we start working on what our action areas are. Now, this is a point in strategic planning where you're going to start hearing a lot of different terms. Different people will talk about this step differently. Some people say goals and objectives. I love the term strategic directions and initiatives. For whatever reason, this is more, my brain can wrap myself around this a little bit easier, that I'm developing a direction with my strategy. Think of it as broad. We're going to build a stronger board. That's a broad statement. The initiatives are how do we do that? Provide board training, recruit new board members, have orientation, etc. Those are initiatives to get to your strategic direction. The actions are even further down on that inverted triangle of the steps that you take to do that. So if your organization is committing to building a stronger board and you're going to train your board, then you have to start thinking about what kind of training do we need? Where do we get it? Who gets involved? Who's going to organize it? How do we pay for it? Those are action steps. So this is the stuff that takes a lot of time, and we're not going to try to do an exercise on this. I'm just going to talk you through one method. The method that I like to use is something where you just do a lot of generative brainstorming. You start off with identifying your vision, and you generate all sorts of components of a practical vision. What can we do in the next 3 years to reach our mission? And so you think about, we're going to expand our board. That's something you could do in 3 years. Or we're going to develop a fundraising plan. Things like that are part of your vision so that we're a stronger organization. Then you look at your barriers. This is the steps to getting to strategic directions. Then based on your barriers, you ask yourself the question, what practical initiatives can we undertake to address these barriers? And you do a generative brainstorming where, and this is where it gets tricky for open meetings laws, because these things work way better in small groups. Noticing your meeting is really important, but sometimes breaking out into small groups is hard to do because of the recording. So that's where we need to do a little bit of research of how you could do this kind of thing. You brainstorm it, and then you do a process of organizing it, sorting it, clumping it, what's similar, what's different. This is hard to read, so I'm just going to read a little bit about what we came up with. We said, how are we going to address our challenges? You saw our challenges. And we came up with find a board training program, establish communication channels, create a board matrix to identify who we need on the board, identify community members that fit our skill sets and our needs, nominate people to the board, develop a board orientation packet. We came up with all those things just for that first column. And then we said, what's a big title that encompasses all of these points that we came up with? And the big title we came up with was Optimizing Board Operations. That is then our strategic direction for the next 3 years. We are really going to focus on optimizing board performance, board operations, and we've come up with a number of initiatives underneath it in order to do that. You, as an individual deeply involved in your organization, can probably do this brainstorming on your own. You could probably do this sorting and clumping on your own and come up with what you need to do. But that doesn't involve everybody you need to involve. And so by having a strategic planning process, you're pulling people together in the room to really generate more ideas, more involvement, more engagement. And it's really creative. That it's kind of amazing what happens when you get a lot of different people in the room and you start coming up with creative solutions. I'm just going to give one example. For a lot of the organizations I work with, they always say lack of funding is their problem. And then you ask why? Why does the organization have a lack of funding? And you might hear things like, we have depended on one revenue stream. We always get DNR money and we've depended on that. Or we lack the skills in our board to go and talk to people to ask for donations. Or we're scared to do a big event. Any number of things, you can get deeper and deeper into it. We can't come up with a strategy to address this issue of we lack funding, but we can come up with a strategy to address the issue of We rely on one source of funding. Well, let's diversify. Let's come up with a fundraising plan that diversifies. Or we don't know how to do fundraising. There's a strategy to address that. Train board members in how to do fundraising. Give them the skills. Build that skill set. All of those things. So you want to drill it down to things you can actually act on. And that, you'll be able to look at this when you get the slideshow and look at what we came up with. I think a lot of it is going to look very, very familiar to you. So this is what we came up with. SLA, optimizing board operations, which I talked about. We had that issue of people don't know what's going on, people aren't involved. So we wanted to expand outreach to inform the community, have education events, put together a newsletter, do some social media, inform people not only about what SLA is doing, but about what the issues are for our lake. Improve volunteer engagement. That might be creative activities. That might be going on a kayaking adventure together. It might be a muck walk. Is there such a thing? Yeah. I don't know. The funding, organize fundraising initiatives, that all of those things that I was talking about with fundraising, of how do you build the capacity to do fundraising. And then the last one, what you're all about, mitigating ecological degradation. It's a big, big category. It's our strategic direction. Underneath that, we're going to do things like, I don't know, what are we going to do? Have crews go out and skim the milfoil off. I don't know if you do that or not. I heard chemical spraying, right? I never came up with that. But we'll come up with all the list of the things that we're going to do as our strategic initiatives.
All right, now the final step. So a lot of strategic planning steps we've covered prior to this may individually seem kind of like, what are we doing here? This is kind of like what it all boils down to, is your action plan. I was a executive director of a river association for 9 years. When I started, I was the only employee with 20 hours a week. So I was part-time. So it was just our board and me for 20 hours a week. We expanded kind of slowly beyond that, but this was my lifeline. Having this document allowed me to have kind of like at least an action plan or some kind of roadmap to get to where we all agreed on this. This is the plan we all agreed on. We took every one of those strategic directions that Sharon mentioned. We boiled those down into actual actionable steps. So I knew as a director, or maybe as a volunteer board, people come and go, you can always point to this document that you're going to create, hopefully on an annual basis. Some corporate businesses do this every 90 days. But on an annual basis, you can create a document like this, and it just takes you right through the steps. What's the action? What do we need? What's the thing that we're going to do? What are the resources we need? What is the outcome that we want from that? Who's responsible? Maybe the most important part of this whole thing. Who's responsible? Name names or name committees, whatever you have. How long is it going to take to complete? By when? And when is it going to be? And when is it completed? So there's accountability all throughout this chart. It takes a while to make, but it's super important. So Sharon is going to hand out, we're going to do a little exercise, our last one, on action planning. There's 5 different, do I have it on here? No, I don't. Oh, these are our strategic directions. So under each strategic direction, we're creating an action plan. And there's an example for each one already created for you. But I think she may just randomly hand you, yeah, yeah. Well, no, there's 2 sets of every packet. So, oh, yeah, absolutely. Yep. So again, we have optimizing board operations. Optimizing board operations is right over here. Expanding outreach is right over here. Improving volunteer engagement, I believe, is there. Okay. Organizing fundraising initiatives and mitigating. Who has the mitigating ecological? That's somewhere back there. Mitigating is over here. Okay. This is gonna be tough. Yeah.
Wade or Sharon, I have a question from someone online. How many strategic directions are a good number for a group to have?
I think 5 is probably the max. Yeah, that's a good question. So I would say strategic directions, maybe no more than 5. Keep it really simple because you're going to have a lot of actionable items underneath each one. All right, we're going to take maybe another minute. And I apologize. I wish I could have explained this better. We were trying to run through as many things as we could. And I don't think we gave as much time to this one as we should have, but why don't we run through one example really quick? Who had, let's see. What table wants to be the guinea pig? I'll help you run through one. You have mitigating. So optimizing board operations. How about that? I think that's a fun one. All right. So optimizing board operations. We'll run through it really quick of kind of maybe the process of how this action plan works. Can I borrow your sheet? Would you mind? That's fine. No problem. That's okay. So with optimizing board engagement, that's the strategic direction, right? So the initiative is we want to recruit board members with the skills that we need. So there you go. So the action number one for recruiting board members was complete a board matrix to identify the skills that we need. So what do we need to do that? What are the resources needed? We need a board matrix tool. Just go to that slide so you can see it. That'd be helpful. We need a board matrix tool. We need maybe a committee to help with this process. What's the expected outcome? We need to identify the gaps in the board. Who's responsible? Maybe it's a nomination committee. Maybe it's an individual. We're going to name them there. How long will this take to complete? Let's just say maybe 2 months or in time for the next board meeting. And then we can put our date completed on the side there. So that means we've identified, we've completed this board matrix. What's the next step to recruiting the board members we want? Maybe it's going out in the community and maybe we found out that we need an accountant, or maybe we need someone with an attorney as an attorney, or an ecological background. Maybe there's just some skill set that we know that we need a planner, a communicator, someone who's really good with doing e-newsletters. I don't care what it is. But we've identified that in the board matrix, and now we got to go find that person. So maybe it means going to the local bank, seeing if we can find a volunteer there, putting an opportunity out there, creating like a job description for that person, and posting it somewhere. It might be one of the actionable items might be creating a communication plan around finding board members. So having an e-newsletter go out, maybe a postcard. Here's specifically what we want. These are the skill sets we need for our board to be better. So that's kind of the actionable items. We're doing 1, 2, 3, 4, finding all the actionable items to find the board skills that we're missing. So again, we ran through this really quick. So this will be in your packet if you put your email address in on that sheet. We're going to have all these materials available to you. Yeah, please.
Typically available that are for the chairperson, the treasurer, and then the secretary. And they're really detailed and excellent. So the resource is already easily available.
Okay, resource available. Is that the UW Stevens Point extension website? Yeah. So they have officer descriptions already for you. Okay. Thanks for adding that. So where do we go from here? If you're interested in strategic planning, there are, I personally am a natural resources educator. There are many of me around the state. So I work in Dane County, but there's also folks that do this regionally. Most of them are trained in doing some kind of strategic planning work. Many of them are quite reasonable price-wise. So that's an option. So this will be included in your email packet as well to try and find those folks. There's also just people that specialize in nonprofit consulting. The price is going to be a little higher, of course. So you have to be able to pay for that. DNR does have some grants. I know river planning grants. I think there's something similar with lakes as well that could pay for a process like this. In my experience, I think it's kind of been between $5,000 and $10,000 to have a consultant. Again, I recommend finding your extension agent. We're we're very friendly to work with. So, and maybe could bring the price down a little bit.
If in your local county you do not have a natural resource extension agent, we have community development educators, such as myself, in many of the counties, not all, but many. And you can also ask a community development educator to help with the strategic planning process.
Great. Okay. So that was our whirlwind of strategic planning stuff. I hope that was useful for you all. Sharon just passed out a survey. You want one more?
Say one thing first. Before we go into the evaluation survey, which you're all filling out already. One of the things that delights me is when I see groups of people getting really animated together in discussion. And I saw that at your tables, that you're sharing your experiences, you're sharing your challenges, you're sharing solutions. And I find that delightful. And I heard in some tables, somebody saying, she's got a really good idea here, or they've done this process and they learned this. And that, to me, is the beauty of strategic planning, is when you get your group together and you start really addressing your issues. And the passion increases, and the connections increase, and your ability to work together increase. So I do want to encourage you all to really take this a step farther. Think about, can we do this within our own organization? Can we take the time and effort it takes to build out and improve our organization, build our capacity, improve what we're doing for the future? I know every organization has challenges with finding new people and with that succession planning and training, but this process can help you address that barrier and get more people involved. The evaluation, this helps us, so thank you for filling it out. If you flip it over on the other side, we collect demographics. That's a requirement, but you can always answer, I prefer not to respond. So if you do us a favor and fill that out, we much appreciate it. And we appreciate you being here. Thank you for coming to this session.